Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. It's a real privilege. For those of you who don't know, but you probably do, my name is Mark Rosmann, parents of Ron and Maria and the family, so thank you all family for coming. Joined by my lovely wife, Virginia Leonard, who is also going to be presenting today on travel tips and traveling abroad. I'm with the Foreign Agricultural Service, and I'll get into a little bit about that. But a little bit of housekeeping. Please enjoy some teas from India, some coffee in the thermos there from Nepal as part of my travels, cookies. Thank you to HMU and to the Harlan Library, HMU for recording, and the library for giving us this venue to present. So what we'll do is I'll talk a little bit about the history of FAS, of what it is within the USDA. Talk a little bit more about why trade and agriculture is important within the Iowa context, about the work that we do in the case of India, and then finish off with slides about and a discussion about traveling abroad. So without further ado, we'll get started. Just really quick, this is what's called the Qutub Minar in New Delhi. It was built by the Mughals during the Mughal period, roughly the 15 to 1700s, exact dates. But that is the tallest minaret in the world that is made by brick, if I'm not mistaken. So disclaimer, have to put this in, information, views, and opinions are those of myself and do not reflect the views of the USDA. This helps with future potential lawsuits. So, raise of hands. Has anybody heard of the Foreign Agriculture Service before? Yeah, besides the family, yes. So I didn't know about this, and I had moved to DC in 2012 and to work through an internship at the Department of State. And even then, it was a few years later where I learned that there was this agency within USDA called the Foreign Agricultural Service. And honestly, I did not know they exist. Most people don't know about us. So who we are is the mission is to link U.S. agriculture to the world to enhance export opportunities for global foods and global food security. We have a staff of about 100 offices throughout covering 180 countries, and in addition to DC staff. So we have what's called a civil service and a foreign service of the Foreign Agricultural Service. Offices are staffed by agriculture attaches. I am considered an attache. And we have local staff who, basically we are the eyes, ears, and voice for U.S. agriculture around the world. So what we do is to identify problems, find solutions, and work to advance opportunities to promote and enhance and advocate for U.S. agriculture and trade and agricultural foreign policy around the globe. So FAS origins, I gotta look at my notes here. So, and this is information provided by one of our FAS, who later became an ambassador, Alan Musters. So, for the first diplomats to do the work of an agricultural attaché is actually Thomas Jefferson. He was considered the first agricultural officer to be elected president, and he was posted to France as an assistant to Benjamin Franklin, and he wrote, my duties at Paris were confined to a few objects: the receipt of our whale oils, salted fish, salted meats, the admission of our rice on equal terms with that of Piedmont, France, Egypt, and the Levant, Middle East, and a mitigation of the monopolies of our tobacco by the farmers. So, quite interesting to see. So the first agricultural, attaché, so a little bit of background. So FAS was created, USDA I should say. FAS was created, USDA, was created in 1862 by Abraham Lincoln. 20 years after that, in 1882, the department posted Edmund Judson Moffat, this person you see here. He was age 23, went to Cornell University. He was staffed and accredited as a deputy consul general at London, but reported to USDA. So he worked on commodity reporting, looking at U.S. meats in particular in England, and he served there in 10 years. So he's considered the first agricultural attaché. And these are the two public servants that are considered the foundation for the work that FAS does on collection of market intelligence and negotiation of market access. So FAS was created in 1930 because nobody else was doing a job that American agricultural interests needed and was considered important in delivering timely, actionable agricultural market intelligence. So I don't know if you can see this, but basically this is a report by the American consulate in Chihuahua in 1911, and basically it says, this person, I have the honor to report that no coffee is produced in this consular district. Thank you. Great. And I don't think there's, Chihuahua's desert, so I don't know the complete context, but this is a good example of why, what used to be and how agricultural, interests have changed over time. So, FAS, after World War I, the farming economy slid into depression, and it became apparent to decision makers that there was a reliance or a need on agricultural information, the information that was available, because USDA had withdrawn originally its attaches, and they lost the eyes and ears of agricultural intelligence abroad. So it was these individuals that you see here, these three persons, created the basic FAS structure that endures today. A man on the left side by the name of Asher Hobson, first head of FAS, created the attaché service and structure in Washington, D.C. Les Wheeler was the head of FAS for about 17 years, created the trade policy functions, which I'll get into, and food aid and technical assistance. And Louis Gay Michael on the far right was the congressman who is responsible for creating the agricultural, the Foreign Agricultural Service, the Act, which I'm trying to think of the name of the Act for that. But there was an agricultural, Foreign Agricultural Service Act. So just to give you an example of kind of what FAS looked like in 1930, there were 10 what we call posts with American citizen staff, 4 attaches, 3 agricultural commissioners, an assistant commissioner, and commodity specialists. All focused, as you can see, mostly in Europe and in a few places, mainly where the British and British Empire had its colonies still. So we get to 1956, there was an increase in attaches. FAS, really started to expand on its agricultural and market information, looking at dealing with post-World War II, a lot of work that USDA and FAS did on food assistance, and, kind of brought back some of the attaché, the technical assistance. So it's not just people reporting on what they see and hear, but also persons with actual agricultural knowledge, agricultural economists, and such. So you see the distribution, the increase here. I don't know if you notice, there's one post or one office that's notably absent here. I don't know if anyone can see that or point it out. What city isn't listed here? Do you see anything in the Soviet Union?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, heart of the Cold War, and there's, one of the largest agricultural producers, yet there was no USDA person there. So kind of interesting to see. So, just to kind of show you a few examples of some of the work that FAS did back then. This is the logo, Foreign Agriculture Markets Reports, which we'll get into. Lists the movie Argo. Has anyone seen the movie Argo? Familiar with the story of the Iran hostage crisis? Well, of the people, one of the persons that was part of that group of persons that hid in the Canadian embassy was an FAS person. Who was an agriculture economist. Lee Schatz was his name. I actually worked with him for a couple of years. He just retired recently. His character, he's kind of an extra in the movie, but that person is actually there. FAS today, as I mentioned, 100 plus offices, all the dots you see there. Notably, there are a few countries that are not being covered, Central Africa, like the Congo, Iran, and a few other locations. So why does all of this matter? Why did I talk about the history of FAS? United States is, in fact, maybe you don't know this, the largest importer and exporter of agricultural products and related products, which I'll get into. So about 25% of U.S. agriculture by value are exported every year. And this year we're expected to reach 200 billion in the fiscal year, 2023. So this, expanding markets for agricultural products helps U.S. farms and businesses thrive, improves quality, variety of U.S. food, and available to consumers around the globe. The United States, or U.S. food in general, be it like processed products or bulk, have a reputation for being safe, maybe not affordable, but safe and high quality. And that's something that is a strength that we see, as FAS, as we do the work around the world. The kind of work that we do, programs and services, there's, four primary areas that we focus on: trade policy, market development and export assistance, data and analysis, and food security. And one caveat is that we are not APHIS. If you're familiar with APHIS, that's the Animal Plant Health Inspection Service. They are the ones that also deal with imports and exports, but APHIS has regulatory authority. So they're the ones that issue phytosanitary or health certificates for exporting or bringing in live animals, for instance. That's the agency that works in that space. So we'll get into these programs areas. Market development and export assistance. So FAS partners with what we call cooperator groups, about 70 of them. That's a cross-section of U.S. agriculture. And these are programs that you might be familiar with, like the checkoff programs, like Corn Growers Association. In this case, we partner with the U.S. Grains Council. So farmers who grow a particular crop, they pay into the associations. They also get funding from USDA, i.e. the taxpayer, to do export assistance and promotions. So just to give you an example, these programs here, like the California almonds, or the Almond Board of California, as we call it, U.S. cranberries, U.S. Grains Council, California wines, California walnuts. These are all industry trade associations, again, that FAS partner with to do programming throughout the world. And I'll get into some of those examples in a bit. Trade policy, the work that we do is to remove trade barriers and enforce U.S. rights under existing trade agreements. So what we do is we also work with foreign governments, international organizations, and other what we call U.S. Government agencies, the United States Trade Representative, to establish international agricultural standards and rules within, say, the WTO, the World Trade Organization, to improve accountability and predictability. So, the goal again is to work on behalf of the American farmer, the American producer, so that they can expand and develop their businesses. In fact, more often than not, we are working a lot with small businesses and smaller organizations. The large companies like Cargill or Bunge or Archer Daniel Midlands, they're a multinational, and they rarely need our help, so to speak, because they're everywhere, they're embedded throughout the world. Although sometimes when they do need our help, they become an American company again, and they come to us. So yeah, and as you can see there, we have 20 free trade agreements, in fact, with throughout the world, with 20 countries, I should say. Data and analysis. The USDA is the gold standard worldwide for agricultural reporting and market intelligence, be it through NASS, the National Agricultural Statistics Service, or FAS, the international arm. And just to give you an example of that, in the case of India or in Central America, a lot of countries don't have the capacity to do their own reporting, so they rely on U.S. reports. You go to the website of the Indian government, the USDA reports are embedded on their website of what we're reporting on, what they are doing, what's being grown, what's being produced, updates to trade policy. Because USDA is considered an unbiased, neutral source of information. A lot of countries will report on something, but they are impacted by politics. We've seen that in the case of India, where they overestimate their wheat and rice production. And there's some drastic implications when that happens, but that's been done due to internal politics. This is an example of arguably the most important FAS, or it's actually part of the Office of the Chief Economist at USDA. It's called the WASDE, the World Agricultural Supply and Demand Estimates. This is the report that comes out once a month, and it's actually how it works, interestingly enough, is that there's a process called lockup where all these economists from FAS, from the Office of the Chief Economist, NAS, ANS, ERS, Economic Research Service, all come together. They lock them up in a room, they take away their cell phones, and then they bring all their information together where they come up with a best faith estimate of a particular commodity. In this case, like wheat or oil seeds, like soybeans or corn, etc. And these are global estimates, and they use a variety of sources from our FAS offices worldwide, say in India, for example, or what's being produced in the United States. Once they get those estimates, they write the report. It's about a 10-page report or so on a set schedule, so everyone knows when it's coming. And it's sent to the secretary, so Secretary Vilsack. He actually signs it first and then reads it. That's been the policy for ever since it was created, because the idea being that the secretary does not, say there's a not favorable harvest or outlook, we don't want the report to be influenced by, for any political reasons. So in this case, as you can see there, if you've read this, it kind of gives these broad estimates of kind of what it looks like with respect to wheat, oil seeds, a whole list of commodities. And the market responds to reports such as this. You'll see a lot of successful farming, brownfield, all these news agencies pick up the report and then they re-report it out. Other governments throughout the world, again, they use this because they know that it's the best data out there. Food security, briefly talk about this. FAS actually helps the USDA international efforts to help developing countries improve agricultural systems and trade capacity, works with USAID, the United States Agency for International Development, on its food aid programs, which I'll get into here in a little bit, and non-emergency food assistance also as well. You can see here, this is a clove processing facility in Timor-Leste built with USDA assistance, and then fortified rice at a warehouse that I saw in Nepal last year. Programs that may be of interest to you is that since the early 2000s, we've had 2 food assistance programs that have made considerable impact throughout the world. I'm a little biased because I used to work in this program. One of them is called the McGovern-Dole International Food for Education and Child Nutrition Program. That's Jim McGovern, senator from South Dakota, and Senator Bob Dole from Kansas. Came together, came up with this food aid program where they work to improve literacy of school-aged children and increase use of nutrition, health, and dietary practices. And this is using U.S. donated food grown either in places like Iowa or throughout the United States. These are food commodities like vegetable oil, rice, corn, soy blends that are typically used, even things like canned salmon that are sent. There are 40 projects in 30 countries, and every year about 60,000 to 90,000 metric tons of U.S. food is sent for direct feeding programs. The other program is called the Food for Progress program, and that's been around for a little bit longer, and it has 2 objectives: to increase agricultural production and increase markets and trade. And how that works is U.S. commodities are monetized in a foreign country through a competitive grant process, through international organizations like a Catholic Relief Service or Lutheran World Relief, and other programs who assume responsibility. They take the money that was sold through the monetization of the U.S. commodities, then they use to fund development activities. So we have programs that work in increasing coffee production in Latin America, for instance, livestock and dairy, either in Sri Lanka or Ethiopia, and going back to the McGovern-Dole program, school feeding programs in Nepal, for instance, which I will show in a little bit. We also do other capacity building programs. I'm sure everybody knows of Norman Borlaug for sure, but there's actually a fellowship program that was created named after him. It's been around for a while, and one of the programs that's used is to bring within developing and middle-income countries researchers, professors, and agricultural knowledge providers to train in the United States in a 3 to 6 month program. And again, it's funded by FAS funding, and they're matched with the U.S. Land Grant Institution, where they do a specific agricultural topic. The idea is that they will learn from the U.S. host university and then take the knowledge back with them back to their country. In the case of, say, Iowa State, for instance, there is researchers from India who are learning on climate-smart agriculture, who are embedded in the Department of Agronomy, for instance, right now, and learning, and they will take that knowledge back to them, back to India. So that's a little bit about, broadly speaking, the work that FAS does. But first, and foremost, we're a trade-based agency. And this is the next part of this presentation, is to talk about, why is, again, trade important, and especially within the Iowa context. So this is information from our USDA Global Agricultural Trade System, also known as GATS. It's coming from the U.S. Customs data, in fact. This is the calendar year 2022 U.S. agriculture and related product exports. So 212 billion by value, and that's the whole spectrum of what we consider an agricultural product. Everything from bulk soybeans, bulk corn, to wine and spirits, to retail processed products, lumber. We get into the related product categories, so things like U.S. ethanol, lumber, biodiesel, forestry products, all get kind of lumped into this. And that's a big number, 212 billion. Like I said earlier, the United States is the largest exporter and largest importer. To put that in perspective, California, wide diversity of agricultural products, 29 billion. Texas is the second largest, 18. Iowa sits at 7 billion, 7.1 billion, and a 3% share of the total. So not bad. That's a pretty significant amount. And what that number looks like, if we break that down, of the 7.1 billion, that's pork products, corn, soybeans. You get see there the range. Mostly kind of the bulk, what you would assume, that Iowa farmers are growing or producing. Ethanol, sugars, which would be corn syrup, I assume, pet food, beer at 1.2, and I put this in here, green tea, $74,000. Does Iowa produce any tea? No. But there are companies in Iowa who package tea and then re-export it. So even the smallest amount gets captured. And I put it in there just to show that, it might not seem like it at times, but Iowa can be a very global place. Here's a company that's producing green tea and managed to get some of it exported. I'm not sure who, but it would be interesting to find out. Where are Iowa agriculture exports going? It's kind of no surprise. Mexico, Canada, we have a free trade agreement through the USMCA. Mexico being the largest, most of that probably being corn, soybeans, some meat. Japan, we have a free trade agreement with Japan, so a lot of Iowa pork and beef. China, a lot of grains and pork there as well. Kind of going down the line, Honduras gets a lot of soybean meal from Iowa for its poultry operations. You know, like I said, we can capture pretty much every country. I think there were 100 plus countries listed of, you know, export, that received exports from Iowa. And even Tanzania, little Tanzania, I think that was the smallest at like $14,000. I don't recall what it was, but the Iowa ag is, you know, goes throughout the world. Moving to India, you know, this is kind of the, we get into India here, and as a bit of background, I was stationed, my wife and I were stationed in India beginning in 2020, right at the beginning of the pandemic, in fact. We arrived in August. So I was stationed to India as an agricultural attaché, where we served for 3 years there. And kind of as I was explaining to you, my job there was to, you know, cover India, Nepal, and Sri Lanka on what, you know, India is producing, you know, be the data analysis, work on food security, work on trade policy, and I'll cover a little bit about that. So India, if you're not aware, India is in fact an agricultural powerhouse. If you look there, it's ranked first in a lot of categories. Pulses like chickpeas, lentils, split peas, first in cotton, first in tea, first in dairy, in fact, one of the largest cattle populations in the world. This is actually first in sugar now, probably first in wheat, the crop that came in this year. Huge producer of apples, actually thanks to U.S. assistance about 100 years ago. So it's an agricultural powerhouse. And, you know, what's interesting though is that it's #1 in all these categories, yet if we look at the farm level, you know, we look at yields compared of India compared to the United States, yields per acre are drastically low. It's interesting. India has the largest population in the world now, as of March of this year, 1.4 billion people. Just massive. 1.4 billion. Half of the population of India is involved in agriculture in some way, be it farmers themselves or working within the supply chains. And because of that, you have this huge population. You have average farm sizes. The average farm size in India is about 3 to 5 acres. Yeah, it's just very, very small. So farmers who grow wheat, it can be very difficult to make a living on that. So there's a lot of government support, a lot of subsidies and such, because again, you look at these yields, you know, on these commodities, much lower than the world average, and much, much lower, way lower than the United States. And there's reasons for that. The sector has lost competitiveness. I mentioned to you the 2.6 acre average land holding size, misuse of fertilizers, just lack of an extension service. You could say, you know, what we would have here in Iowa, Iowa State Extension. The extensions program in India is just not the same. Lack of cold chain, market infrastructure, government policies, all these things that have kind of inhibited India's agricultural footprint, despite the fact that it's still #1 in all these categories. The logo didn't show up there, but this was actually at the same time, you know, India is one of the most difficult places in the world to do business in. And if you see here, the Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, said last year is that India is an agricultural country and should not bring even a single agricultural commodity from outside. So that made our work at FAS extremely difficult, but made it fun. There we go. In Hindi, the term they use is called self-reliant India, Atmanirbhar Bharat. And it's kind of like the rallying cry of, I hate to compare, but America first, think of it as like kind of that idea, self-reliant India. So this is just to look at, however, you know, India is still an importer of U.S. agricultural products. mostly what we would consider these consumer-oriented total. That's mostly tree nuts. In fact, India is the largest consumer of tree nuts in the world, and because of that, California almonds, their largest market is India. It's about $1 billion. So bulk total, that's kind of like your bulk, like ethanol and grains, intermediate being more processed products. That's how we break them out. But last year in 2022, we did set a record, 2.4 billion, which compared to other countries, I think for the United States, it's the 13th largest market for India. Really quickly, just a quick bit of demographics. I told you it's the most populous country right now. It's also one of the youngest populations in the world. The average age is, I think it's in low 30s, but the 62% is under 35. Increasingly modern, expanding middle class, huge Indian diaspora in the United States. And because of that, you get a lot of people who are exposed to U.S. and American culture and traditions, and they want to bring that back with them. Really quick, also, we kind of look at bilateral agriculture trade. We exported 2.4 billion last year. 42% of that was tree nuts, mostly almonds, followed by pistachios and walnuts. U.S. cotton, ethanol. Ethanol for industrial use. They use India produces its own ethanol from sugar and prohibits any imports of ethanol for fuel blending. And that was something that we had tried for a long time to get India to change, but could not. Soybean oil. India is the largest consumer of vegetable oils, or what we call edible oils, in the world. And they're importing, it's in the billions, but huge consumer of edible oils for its use in its Indian food and its cuisines, heavy on oils. They bring in a lot of lumber for their furniture industry. Indian exports to the United States, seafood, in fact, 45%. The majority of the shrimp that you will find in the United States is actually likely from India. It's a huge shrimp producer. So.
Is it, you say a shrimp, I like shrimp, but is it from raised on a farm? Or
yes, most of it's what we consider aquaculture,
okay.
So farm-raised shrimp. There's actually a prohibition on wild-caught shrimp from India, actually due to turtle endangerment, because of there's too many turtles that get killed during the capturing. And India actually has a ways to go, apparently. I don't know too much about it, but I think that's the reason. But they export a lot of rice, basmati rice in particular, really fragrant, good tasting rice, sugar, sweeteners, and certain vegetable oils like mustard oil, for instance. But we have a trade deficit with India in agriculture. Really quick, I won't get into the weeds on this, but we in FAS have been fighting for market access for U.S. dairy, because India has the largest dairy population. They're very protective of their farmers, so they don't want market access for a lot of products, things like DDGs, dried distillers grains, that are the feed that's produced from producing ethanol, for instance, ethanol for fuel blending, alfalfa. We got market access for alfalfa, but then they learned that it was going to be GE alfalfa or biotech alfalfa, and they said no. They also have high and constantly shifting duties or cess, like a tax, import duties on U.S. commodities. To give an example, all alcohol imports have 150% import tax. So any product that comes in, like a $10 bottle of wine becomes a $90 bottle of wine. Retaliatory tariffs on apples, pulses, and walnuts. In 2018, the previous administration, you remember the trade war that we had with China, the steel and aluminum tariffs. There were also tariffs put on India, and India retaliated by targeting U.S. apples, lentils, and chickpeas, and walnuts, and really we lost out on market share there. However, right before I left India. There was a trade agreement when Prime Minister Modi visited the United States in June. Those tariffs were lifted as part of this trade agreement, so a small win. Like I said, 2.4 billion agricultural and related products. California is like more than half of those products, mostly tree nuts. Pistachios have just become a huge product. Wine and spirits have grown drastically, and I'll explain a little bit why that is once we get into that. Pecans, also a huge win. The senator from Georgia, Asif, actually traveled to India and lobbied the government, and we worked with the Georgia Pecan Federation to help get those tariffs reduced from 70%, 100% to 30%. So this gets into, again, kind of the work that we're doing in India. A lot of the work is not just policy, but also marketing, and marketing Iowa, which is really exciting. There in India, we have what's called our Taste of America initiative. It's kind of our flagship program or umbrella program. We have social media on Instagram and Twitter. All the activities we do are within our Taste of America promotions. So be it retail promotions, trade shows. Here's us inaugurating a booth at a trade show in India. Working with companies like Organic Valley or the U.S. Grains Council or the Iowa Renewable Fuels Association. India does not eat U.S. beef, but I put this photo there because it was at a trade show in Singapore that I participated in, and there, U.S. Iowa beef was being promoted to other countries in the region. A lot of work involves diplomacy and meeting with organizations, talking about the importance and role of global trade and reducing trade barriers. So that's me. Here's another one, just to give you an example of advocating for U.S. ethanol. But the best part of this job was probably promoting U.S. wines and spirits, because who doesn't like alcohol? So, and here's where the Iowa connection comes in. So, a bit of background is that India is the largest consumer of whiskey in the world. They love whiskey. They love a lot of single malts from Scotland. They produce a lot of their own whiskey, although technically it's not whiskey because it's produced from sugar. What they produce is from all of their sugar, because most whiskey is produced from grain, right? Corn or rye or wheat. But Indians are slowly adapting their taste profiles to bourbons and ryes, and we thought it was be a good idea to do some programming, because our office gets funding from the home agency to do market promotions in retail. So we did a Taste of the Midwest program. When was that? In 2021. And you can see here a range of whiskeys, some of them from Iowa, some of them you might recognize. Templeton Rye, which is currently being sold in India. Gunfighter, that's, I can't remember the name of the company off the top of my head, but it's a company in Colorado. Koval out of Chicago, and Cody Road. Cody Road being the Burchett's former Harlanites, now in LeClaire. And Driftless Glen, that's a company out of Wisconsin. So did a lovely promotion, got some real interest in U.S. bourbons, did a tasting. We actually had our then acting ambassador, who's also an Iowa native, who was, fun fact, is also, whose best friend, this woman here is our acting ambassador, went to Northern Iowa for her undergrad, whose best friend to this day is my dad's first cousin. Go figure, learned about that in India. Helped out with our promotions. So we were actually able to increase our spirits exports in a remarkable way. Also, up-and-coming wine consumer. Love California wines. We've done promotions in places like Chennai and in Calcutta. But there's challenges, things like getting products in, it's very expensive, and the high tariffs, and then cold chain. A lot of wines go bad being shipped halfway around the world. Other work, food aid. As I mentioned to you, the McGovern-Dole Food for Education program. We have a program in Nepal that the World Food Program is our partner. And I went there in 2022 I should say, to observe the programs and see how it's running. This is a program, one of the schools that was up in the Himalayan mountains in a very rural area where they get one meal a day at the school consisting of rice, yellow split peas, and cooked with vegetable oils. And this is where they actually eat outside on a tarp, one midday meal. And this is, to me personally, this is the work that's more meaningful. Not saying the work on trade is not important. It's very, enjoy doing it, but this work, working with the most needy, you could say, of individuals, and knowing that USDA programs are making a difference. And you might not hear about it much, but working to feed thousands of school kids in the most remote places. So this is very enjoyable. So I had the privilege of giving a midday meal to these children lining up. Just really, really neat. So, okay, that's enough about FAS. We're wrapping up on India. So life in the Foreign Service is hectic, but fun. And I'm kind of pivoting now to India as a country and why you should travel there. Really enjoyable experience. Like I said, we spent 3 years there during the heart of COVID, in the COVID second wave, which was a real challenge, a real disaster. But India, as a place, I encourage everyone to travel there. It is a remarkable place. India's, there's a reputation that India is considered a monolith, meaning, like all of India is the same. But India is very, very diverse. 27 official languages. I think there's like 29 states and 11 union territories, each with their unique culture and such. Here you have Old Delhi, the famous old original market of Delhi, just a chaotic place where you have street vendors selling everything. This was taken on my last day near my apartment where Virginia and I lived. Cows walking the streets. As you know, cow is a sacred animal in the Hindu faith. And cattle just roam freely all throughout the streets. It's very interesting. People making carpets, and then in the regional travel, that's actually that's the Burj Khalifa in Dubai. So it's India, actually, in being a regional area, being able to travel to other parts of the country. Got to see elephants. Also had some visitors come of the Rosmann family, so very enjoyable there. This was taken in Jaipur, ancient historic city where the Mughal Empire had fortresses and left a lot of their culture as well. This is mainly just to show you the U.S. Embassy and our U.S. Embassy team. The ambassador is Eric Garcetti, former mayor of Los Angeles. I had the privilege of meeting him, at least for a couple months. Most of the people that are on the FAS USDA team are Indian. And that's a common thing we have throughout the world. Of, most of our subject matter experts are host country nationals from that particular country. U.S. Embassy, this building here was built in the 1950s. Does it look anything similar in the other building that you might have noticed? The Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. is modeled after the U.S. Embassy. Same, I think it's the same architect. Yeah. So, another reason why you should go to New Delhi is visiting the Taj Mahal. This Taj is in the city of Agra. It's considered a small city by India standards. Still has like 5 million people. If I'm being honest, this picture was taken during COVID. So it was taken at a time when foreign travelers weren't permitted to come. So we were fortunate enough to have the Taj for ourselves, basically. But to be honest, it's not that bad as far as visitors. It's not overcrowded. But a must-see location, just absolutely gorgeous. This is in the city of Amritsar. This is the Golden Temple, as it's called. This is the most holy site for the Sikh faith. And just a remarkable place. My parents and I in Virginia had the privilege of going there, and going there at night in particular is remarkable. People walk in into this kind of temple on the water and pray, give their reverence, the Sikh faith. For those of you who don't know, the people you might have seen who wear turbans, for instance. I'm not doing justice for it. I won't be able to explain too much about the Sikh faith itself, but this is located in the northwest part of India. Also a must-go-to place. And there are also places that fly under the radar. This is a location called Hampi in southern India in the state of Karnataka. An old ancient ruined city. Was it Mughal era? Or is it Hindu? Actually, it would be Hindu. But an ancient city, and a lot of its remnants still last today. This is a chariot completely carved out of stone. India is famous for what we call step wells that we see throughout India. These were wells that were built starting in the 13th, 14th century. They fill it with water. It filled either through rainwater or groundwater. But they would build these series of steps so that people could go down and draw their water from it. Just remarkable. And a lot of them survive to this day. Another is what's called the Ellora and Ajanta caves. These are ancient caves that were they're not natural caves. They were carved from this kind of this ravine area, dating back to 100 BC originally, where the Jain faith and Buddhists had carved these temples, these shrines for the Buddha, for the Jain faith, and eventually Hindu as well, and all carved from stone. There's this network of multiple caves. There's artwork that dates back 2,000 years. Just a remarkable place, and also worth considering. The closest place you fly into would be near Mumbai. Rosmann, where it's technically. Switching gears a little bit, this is Nepal. As part of my work, I had the privilege of covering Nepal during my time there, and did a lot of work there, as I've shown you the pictures of the school kids. This is in Kathmandu, a remarkable city. It's one of my favorite places to visit. I took this picture at one of their one of their Hindu temples. It's mostly a Buddhist state, but there is Hinduism in Nepal. And this place here is rather polluted, as you can see, but it's considered a UNESCO heritage site. And they're, in fact, cremating bodies. It's a bit morbid, but it was very, if I'm being honest, it was very fascinating to see that. Just the constant flow of people who have passed on, and the sacred rite of cremation. You may have heard of Varanasi in India. It's also a city where it's a holy site where a lot of Hindus go to pay their respects. They go to the Ganges River, and a lot of cremations happen there as well. India-Pakistan border. This is called the Wagah border. This is also outside Amritsar, where the Golden Temple is. Also kind of a cool must-see thing. I'll show you why. It's because I'm sure many of you or all of you are familiar with the historical clashes between India and Pakistan. After India and Pakistan gained their independence in 1947, they became rivals, bitter rivals ever since. A lot of Muslim versus Hindu, but also just nationalism between the two countries. There were two wars that have been fought between them in the 75 years. But they're on the border there. They have what's basically, they built an arena on both sides, where every day both countries have their militaries basically conduct a pep rally, and it's a contest. And it's we all went, Mom, Dad, and Virginia and I, and as you can see, they do high kicks, and it's a show off of their forces. And it's really fascinating. So much so that we have a video. So, excuse the constant moving of the camera, but this is me taking the video. That's the Pakistan side. Much smaller stadium. But basically they're in a shouting match. Who can shout the longest and without losing breath, basically. So we're sitting on the India side, and here are, the Indian Army team forces coming by. They're marching with these huge regalia on their head. And then on the Pakistan side, they're doing the same thing.
Is that a division between?
Yep, that is the border right there.
Okay.
Yep, there's the gate there. And the men sit on this side, and the females sit on this side in Pakistan. They have split. And India, before this starts, they bring out all the women and they start dancing. Kind of to show off, because in Pakistan they're not allowed. So also a kind of cool thing to see, though. It's a pep rally. They're showing off. They even, they twist their mustaches, or they stroke their beards to show off as well. They do high kicks. But at the end of it, they do shake hands, because they do cooperate. And even during Diwali, one of the most famous Indian Hindu celebrations, they actually exchange sweets, like chocolates to each other.
How often do they do that?
Every day.
Oh, every day.
Every day. Okay, switching gears. This is us with powder. I'm familiar with Holi, the festival of colors. This is in Udaipur. Two things to note. This is I think in March every year when Holi takes place. It's a really fun time where people throw colors on each other. It's very happy. We did this in Udaipur. This here is the palace on the water, also where they filmed Octopussy? No, one of the Bond movies. It's there. I think it is Octopussy where they filmed that. So, I'm not doing justice by showing more of India, because India is fascinating. It's massive. It's full of. It's a lot. What I tell people about India in general, it's a lot. Meaning, it's a lot of people. It's everywhere. It's a massive humanity. It has challenges, massive pollution. It's one of the most polluted countries out there. But it also has a lot of amazing stuff. Amazing Indian food, obviously. Amazing people, some of the kindest people you will meet. And just a great place all around. So with that, I will pivot from talking about India and the Foreign Service and FAS to talking about traveling. And I will present my lovely wife, Virginia, to talk a little bit about her office and to get you all interested in traveling now.
Sorry, I'll just take a little bit more of your time. So a little bit about me. My name is Virginia, and I actually work for the Department of State, the Office of American Citizen Services. And that's a lot of words to say. When U.S. citizens get in trouble overseas, my office is the one that helps. However, we really don't want you to get into trouble overseas, and so we have programs that we like to do to help prevent and how to make your trip go as smoothly as possible. So I'm going to take a few minutes to share this little video with you and then talk about some of the products that we have out there to help your travel go smoothly. video. And now that you are interested in traveling to India, I hope this will help you travel smart from the start. So just a quick little recap is one of the biggest things that we have for every country that you can imagine traveling to. We have information on our travel.state.gov for every country. You can type it in and you can go to the page. We've got information on safety and security information in the form of our travel advisories. And those are ranked from 1 to 4 based on our level of advice for those countries. And those are generally like the hard-hitting, what we really need you to know right from the go. The other things, if you scroll down further on the page, then you'll find more of our detailed information. I like to call it kind of the floaters or the Lonely Planet travel guide. That's where you're going to get the information about things you should and shouldn't pack, places you may or may not need to, may or may not be allowed to take photos of when you're traveling, because there are some countries that have restrictions on those things. I know that there are some countries where taking certain prescriptions that you're allowed here in the US are illegal in other countries. So it's always important to check and see what those regulations are before you go. Oftentimes, if you run into trouble overseas, then obviously you can always give us a call, and our embassy will do its best to help you get through the process, whether that's helping explain what's going on, or if you need just kind of someone who understands the local circumstances a little bit better to either explain it to them or to explain it to you. And then the final thing, and probably one of my favorite things, so this is what our information pages look like. And these are, if you look on your phone, they're mobile friendly. So you can scroll down. These are the 4 levels of advice we have. Exercise normal precautions, because there's no place in the world that doesn't come with some risk. Then we have exercise increased caution, reconsider travel to, and do not travel. And then we have more general information like how long you need your passport to be valid for, how many pages you need on your visa, do you need a visa before you go, vaccinations, things like that. And then we also have on every page the contact information we love you to save and keep handy. And then finally, one of my favorite things is our STEP program. This is really great for just letting us know that you're in the country. Believe it or not, we don't know these things. So if you share this information with us, then if you have a loved one that needs to reach you and is having difficulty, we might be able to contact local hotels or other people while you're traveling on their behalf. We can't share information. We are bound to the Privacy Act, so without your permission, we can't share any of your personal information with anybody else, but at least it would allow us to check on you if you needed some sort of assistance. But if we don't know that and your family doesn't know that, then we have a lot harder time locating you. But also what this does is this allows us to send you important information. So say there is a lot of rain somewhere where you are traveling and there are landslides and you may or may not be aware of that. Sometimes we will send that information to you directly to your phone or your email using this program. So that's just one of the ways that we can help communicate with you on things that may affect your travel overseas. I use it personally. I know Mark does as well, and I found it to be very helpful personally as well. So now that you're interested in traveling, I will no longer take any more of your time. I'll be here to answer some questions, but I really wanted to leave the last bit to Mark to answer the questions that you all have for him.
All right. Well, thank you, Virginia. Yeah, we threw a lot of information at you, so apologies in advance. But if there are any questions, we are, for either of us, more than happy to take them. Yes?
You touched on a lot about the more well-to-do areas of India and the nice touristy places to see, but there's also the Mother Teresa side of it, and the caste system, and I was wondering, and isn't India one of the poorest countries in the world?
India is considered a middle income, middle developing country. Having said that, from our perspective, there is a huge gap between rich and poor because of 1.4 billion persons. So
Is there any change in the system, the caste system, or there's any changes where they're getting rid of the caste system so people have the opportunity to move up, or is that just kind of what it is?
Legally, it's been removed, but socially, it still exists. So you see that from time to time in certain contexts, and people, maybe not in a negative way either, but people say, "Oh, I'm a Brahmin," or "I'm the other," and a lot of it's just to refer to kind of their family history as well. But yeah, if we're being honest, yeah, the caste system, there are some challenges that still exist in certain contexts, especially in kind of rural areas in particular. Yes?
So why do you think that the population is so young? What has promoted that? Where are the older, what was it, 60-some% or 35 or younger?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you're getting a population boom that happened in part because India experienced its own green revolution. That before then we had certain significant famines like the Bengal famine in I believe 1942, and the work that Indian researchers, and in fact Norman Borlaug in part, he wasn't solely responsible, but helped increase wheat and rice production that combined, and there was what's called a white revolution for milk production as well. And I think that combined with improved health outcomes and slowly increased incomes led to more children surviving, but at the same time you're having a significant population boom of that rural segment, the 600 million, well now, but involved in agriculture. So you have larger families, but a higher survival rate. So I think that's part of the answer. I'm sure there's a better one out there, but I think that's
Interesting.
yeah. Yes.
So their work or labor is done mostly by hand?
A lot of it.
They're not mechanized so much as we here.
Yes and no. They have a huge manufacturing and usage of tractors, lots of tractors, but tractors there are much smaller. Think of them as open cab, small tractors that you may have seen being used, decades ago, or we still use on our farm. But they're smaller, but they're meant for the kind of smaller land sizes. So you see a mix of hand labor for planting rice, for instance. They plant what they call paddy in the wet marsh, so it requires a lot of manual labor. Some of it's wheat is still harvested by hand, but sometimes tractors will do it as well. So it just depends on the crop. Anything else?
You mentioned Jains. Are they the ones that don't step on insects? I mean, there is.
Yes.
Yes, they actually don't, they're also very cognizant of the plants that they eat, so much so that I think like tubers, they won't eat them if you have to destroy the entire plant in order to consume it. So they're
Root crops.
right. So they tend to eat plants that the plant will continue to grow once you've cut part of it off. But if you have to destroy the entire plant in order to consume it, they won't eat it. So they're kind of a much strict. There's a lot more restrictions with Jainism than even with the Hinduism and the vegetarianism that the Hindus observe.
But they're considered very peaceful. It's a small percentage of individuals who are Jains in Jainism, but there are restaurants for Jains that are specific on the diet. The majority of Indians are vegetarian, And it's kind of like the default, so you're either what they call veg or non-veg. So the default is your vegetarian food options. So then if you do eat meat, you're considered a non-veg person. So a lot of poultry or fish, for instance.
So do they separate vegans from vegetarians too? I mean, are they non-egg?
Yeah, there are some Hindus, or Indians, I should say, who don't eat eggs either, for sure. There's all these different levels, so it's not just like one, I'm vegetarian, but there's carve-outs,
Right,
so to speak.
And yet they import a lot of meat.
They import a certain amount of meat. It's not too high,
Oh.
actually. From the slides, they do import some poultry, meat like turkey and duck from the United States, for instance. But in fact, they're exporting a lot more. Cows are, as I mentioned, are holy and sacred. So there's a prohibition on cow slaughter. And that is, there's been some tensions on that between Muslims and Hindus, because India also has the largest Hindu Muslim minority in the world. I think at 300 million, so massive. But anyway, they're...
But to that point, they have the largest, so there are more Muslims in India than there are in Pakistan. And they do eat meat. So while they are a minority within the country of India, there are still more Muslims within that country than there are in neighboring Pakistan. So that's a really strange concept, at least for me, to wrap my head around.
The world's largest minority.
Yeah.
But I think what I was getting at is that they're a huge producer of what we call cara beef, or water buffalo, where there are no restrictions. So they actually export a lot of that throughout the world. They're used mainly as labor, like oxen pulling. So.
And those aren't holy?
No, not in the same way as the cow is.
What do they do, so the cows are holy, but when they pass away from natural causes, how do they dispose of the animals there?
They have people who pick the carcass up.
Are they cremated also then, or?
Yeah, more often than not, it just depends. We never actually saw any dead animals, but there's so many. I think India has about 20 to 25 million head of cattle in India alone. It's the largest herd, but there are still at least 5 to 10 million that are free range. They roam. Part of the reason why there's so many is because a farmer can't afford to keep an animal once it gets past its either working age or for use as dairy. So
they just kind of turn them loose?
They turn them loose, yeah. And in fact, there are numerous deaths by people just by car accidents, for instance, by running into cattle.
They're kind of
or
like
trains.
deer.
Yeah, like the deer. So people, and you don't want to hit a cow. You do not.
Lots of paperwork.
You don't want to deal with the mob.
Yeah, COVID-19, how hard did it hit India?
It was very hard.
The first wave was harder on the lockdown. A lot of people had, India locked their country down really hard, and they made people go home. People overnight were stranded. A lot of times companies will bring workers from smaller villages. They'll take them into larger cities for work, and then after their rotation is done, they'll go back to their villages for a little bit, and then they do it over again. With that, a lot of displaced workers were stranded overnight, and they were having to walk thousands of miles just to get back to their villages. So in that sense, the first wave was very difficult for them, but really with the second wave was for them took a toll that we were there for the second wave when the Delta variant hit, and it was really tragic.
April, May of 2021.
Yeah.
When that happened.
In fact, one of the Mark's colleagues in his office lost his life to the second wave.
I mean, in terms of numbers, there's over 1 million people have lost their life in this country with COVID-19. Any facts, figures, or numbers?
They can get a true count. It would, not to be morbid, but it was really bad. I mean, we had 5 deaths at the embassy of colleagues, mainly local staff, because the vaccine had just been rolled out. And India also they were running out of oxygen, and the government was, to be fair, the government was trying its best with limited resources. But
we didn't even have the vaccine. We had only just gotten the first shot when the Delta variant started hitting New Delhi at that point. And actually, I think Mark's colleague had it, but didn't realize he had it when he got his first shot. But unfortunately, it was too late at that point.
yeah, it was a challenge, especially since they cremate the bodies, and you may have seen photos at the time that were grabbed world attention just because of the massive funeral pyres.
What is the life expectancy now?
It is, generally speaking, it's gotten up. I think it's around 72, 71 years, I think, which there's been massive improvements. Like I say, India has made massive developments over time. It's now the 5th largest economy. Prime Minister Modi has been in power since 2014, and it's arguably transformed much of the country. It's grabbing the news constantly. It's a key partner with the United States in a variety of areas: defense, agriculture, the diaspora. New Delhi is the embassy in New Delhi, the U.S. embassy. Processes more visas than any other embassy in the world.
Not just the mission.
Yeah, well, you're right. But the demand for skilled laborers from India, like in the tech sector, for instance, or other.
But also they have a very large growing middle class who have money and want to spend it and travel as well. So we also have a lot of people from India who are traveling more, but that also means that they have more personal security in their own lives. So I imagine that 72 a decade from now will be increased as well. I mean, if you're just asking my opinion, I think that their lifestyle is becoming more and more secure as well.
So that doesn't have anything to do with the 62% or something that are 35. I mean, the life expectancy is more that they're able to have and keep their children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, India's medical system is vastly improved. It's apart from COVID. Yeah, you're seeing, India may have pockets of food insecurity, as we do in the United States, certainly. But you're not seeing the levels of, famines or anything that India was experiencing, as far back as the 80s, for instance, or 1970s.
Is there a big terrain difference between the whole country? Like the United States, is totally different response. And you had showed Kathmandu, isn't that one of the supply stops before they go climb the Mount Himalayas?
The Everest, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So do they have like coastal, desert, and then the mountains?
Yes. Yeah, India is pretty diverse. Where we were, like these palaces that we showed you, those were desert areas in the state of Rajasthan in the western side of the country. If you New Delhi is in the north central part of India. If you go south there, it's pretty flat. A lot of it's really flat. But you also have these plateaus, that run along on the west coast of India. The Deccan Plateau, as it's called. On the northern edge between Nepal and India are the beginnings of the Himalayas, so you have mountainous areas. You get into Nepal, and you have this area called the Terai, and it's basically a valley. It's still at altitude, but it's a valley that kind of extends across the country. So then north of that is where you have the Himalayas, where Everest is, and this year, actually, Nepal set a new record for number of climbers who have scaled Mount Everest. So it's a very up-and-coming place.
Because there's so many people, do they put a limit on how many children they should have? No.
No, but there had been historically efforts to kind of control population, not in the same way as, say, China, but
Historically, they've been very interested in the gender of the child, and so there are regulations. The expecting parents aren't allowed to ask what gender their child is going to be for fear of infanticide or harm to the expecting mother. So that is actually against the law, and even people who, like, we know our friends with the Argentinian embassy, they were expecting a child and they couldn't find out the information until they went back to Argentina when they were able to get those answers.
Is the male more prominent than the female?
in this context, yes.
Dowries are considered to be illegal, but yet there are still a lot of dowry contracts, and some of the dowry contracts do stipulate dowries to have a contingency on a male son or a male child. So that can be a little contentious, which is why A, dowries are illegal, and B, they're not allowed to get that information prior to the birth of the child.
Yes.
Is global warming having much effect of the glaciers in Nepal?
You hear about it in the news.
Okay.
It's not coming up as much, but there's an El Nino weather effects that's happening this year, and India is very concerned about that in particular. Yeah. But yeah, like long term, if the glaciers do melt, theoretically, the Ganges would be flooded. There would be a lot of challenges. Heat in India is also be a challenge.
I really hate to break up the awesome questions that we're having, but I think we have time for 2 more questions before we have to close it down. Just because we close in like 30 minutes. Sorry.
What are your next adventures?
Great question. Beginning in mid-August, we will begin our next assignment in Bogota, Colombia, in South America. So our next session, whenever that will be on coffee.
Thank you.
Yes.
Do they schedule or assign you two together? I mean, is the government pretty good about doing that, or was that tricky to get assigned to the same location?
Good question.
That's a great question. So I'm actually not a Foreign Service officer, I'm a Civil Service officer, and my job is based out of Washington, D.C. And I have a special arrangement. It's called a domestic employee teleworking overseas. And I work remotely, basically, doing my job online most of the time. So yeah. So for me, it is actually a little easier this way because we can just go where his assignment is. I do know that there are what they call Foreign Service tandem couples where they're both in the Foreign Service. And they do say that it can be quite tricky to manage that because they might have to prioritize one's career one tour and then prioritize the other one's career for another tour. Or sometimes they take assignments that are in completely different countries, and that can be a little challenging, as you can imagine.
Conflict of interest.
To avoid conflict or interest, or to just further each of their careers independently until they can take an assignment together. Sometimes families, it's just a family decision that they have to make. But fortunately, my job is in Washington, D.C. unless he has a job somewhere else, and then I can go with him. So I just want to thank you all for your attention and for giving me a moment to talk a little bit about some of the things that we do. I'm going to leave these right here. If you have any questions or you didn't have time to take notes and you wanted to, there's a QR code you can scan and just the 5 tips that our office has for you all right there. And if you have any questions,
So again, thank you. And again, India, fascinating place. Love it. Can't recommend it enough for you to travel there. And at the very least, try the Indian food.